Welcome to the Apartment Woodworker. My name is Demetrius, and today we're going to be making a picture frame for my best friend. He passed away about 2 years ago, but he lived 14 and a half amazing years of life with me, and we grew up together. So I wanted to do something special for him. Now, I spent some time looking around online, and I came across this amazing form of Japanese pottery called Kintsugi. I believe that's what it's called. Don't quote me on the pronunciation. Now, I'm going to read you the Wikipedia definition. Kintsugi, also known as kintsukuroi, is a Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the areas of breakage with lacquer, dusted or mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum, a method similar to the maki technique. Now, the reason why this resonated with me is I love the concept of fixing something that's broken instead of getting something new. And also the process of repairing it and visually being able to see that it's been broken and repaired back together with the beautiful gold lines. Now we're going to make this out of hard maple with a little bit of epoxy inlay with a gold tint. So let's see how this all works out. Let's get to it. I measured the picture frame I already had just to kind of get a rough starting spot. Because the board was wider than my miter saw, I tried to get it completely cut through, but there was a little piece that was left. I ended up breaking it off and just flush trimming it with my handsaw, and I glued that little piece back onto the full board. So now I'm doing the cross cuts on the width of the pieces. I left a little extra so that I could sneak up on the final width. Next, I resawed the pieces down to about 5/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more on my bandsaw. So ultimately I wanted the picture frame to be about 1/2 inch. As you can see here, I'm about 1/8 wider than that. The reason I did this is because I was going to plane it down to smooth the one face, but also to leave room for when I sand the epoxy. That way I'd have a little bit of extra room that I could take material off. You can see the final width through the planer. I left about 1/16. And now I'm setting up my router table to create the rabbet inside the picture frame. Now I'm getting the pieces to their final width. I then used my miter saw with the stop block to get the final dimensions for the frame. I did a little test fit here just to make sure that it would fit in, because in the past I've definitely cut things short, and once it was glued up it'd be really difficult to open that rabbet up. So I just made sure everything fit nice and snug. Now it's time for the glue up. Miter glue ups are my least favorite because the joints are very difficult to get tight as well as flat, so that you don't have to sand the whole piece down. And in this specific situation, my miter saw wasn't at a perfect 45 degrees. I think it was at maybe 45 and a half or a half degree off, which left gaps around the picture frame, which even further complicated it. In the future, I'm definitely gonna make sure I make a miter crosscut sled on my table saw just to alleviate some of that pressure. But I got it done. As you can see here, I'm using a square as well to make sure that the picture frame stays nice and square, even if there are gaps, which I'll then fill in later. So because I'm going to be doing the epoxy inlay and hand routing in with my Dremel, I decided to reinforce the corners with a spline. I found the best way to do this was to find the thickest piece that I had and to resaw it on my table saw here to about 1/8 of an inch. Here's my spline jig. Super simple. I just throw it over my fence, clamp down my picture frame, and then just run it through the saw blade and do that to all 4 corners. So the splines were a little bit snug. Each corner I individually went through and sanded them to get a perfect fit with glue. Here I'm using the leftover sawdust and some glue to fill in the gaps on the corners. Once the glue is dried, I used my flush trim saw to cut off the splines. So that's the basic picture frame. Now the fun part begins. So I just hand drew the cracks the best that I thought they looked. Just really random, sharp, jagged lines as if you were to drop a piece of glass and put it back together. So the carving, I used 1/8 of an inch spiral cut bit that CNCs use. This bit worked perfectly. This is hard maple. It has a tendency to burn, and it broke a previous 1/8 inch router bit that I had, but this spiral cut bit was perfect. The lines were very clean. I didn't have to go over anything again, and it didn't leave any tear out. So because this was my first time using epoxy, I didn't want to jump right in and get any of the expensive stuff. I've used 5-minute epoxy before, never in this way. So the only thing that I would recommend if someone was going to do this themselves is pour it very shallow, because obviously it's 5 minutes, it activates very quickly. It took me longer than 5 minutes to pour it all through. But beyond that, I thought this worked perfectly. I could have definitely used a clearer epoxy. As you can tell, it has a bit of an orange hue, but I still think it turned out wonderful. And for the size of this project, the convenience and the cost, it was definitely a good choice. So there we go. It's all dried. I let it cure for 24 hours. So just to get it down, because of how thick the pour was, I used my belt sander. Once I had it about a 1/16 of an inch proud of the surface, I used my orbital and worked my way through 80 to 220 grit sandpaper. I did sand it up to 600 just so that I could get some of those really small scratches out of the epoxy to make it pop a little bit more once I applied finish. Now it's time for finish. I used 3 coats of shellac with a light buffing in between the second and third coat. I just used the securing tabs from the original picture frame I had and bought some gold screws to complement the aesthetic. Overall, this was a really fun project for me. It was nice to see the concept in my brain manifest itself in reality, and I think it turned out really good. The epoxy was wonderful. It's definitely something I want to continue using in the future. And hand carving it was really easy.